a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Rupert Murdoch. Keith Rupert Murdoch is an Australian-born American media mogul. His father, Sir Keith Murdoch, had been a reporter, editor, and senior executive of the Herald and Weekly Times newspaper publishing company, covering all Australian states except New South Wales. After his father's death in 1952, Murdoch declined to join his late father's registered public company and created his own private company, News Limited. Murdoch thus had full control as chairman and CEO of global media holding company News Corporation, now the world's second-largest media conglomerate, and its successors, News Corp and 21st Century Fox, after the conglomerate split on 28 June 2013. In the 1950s and 1960s, Murdoch acquired a number of newspapers in Australia and New Zealand, before expanding into the United Kingdom in 1969. Taking over the News of the World, followed closely by The Sun. Murdoch moved to New York City in 1974, to expand into the US market. However, he retained interests in Australia and Britain. In 1981, Murdoch bought The Times, his first British broadsheet, and became a naturalised US citizen in 1985 to satisfy the legal requirement for US television ownership. In 1986, keen to adopt newer electronic publishing technologies, Murdoch consolidated his UK printing operations in Wapping, causing bitter industrial disputes. Murdoch's News Corporation acquired 20th Century Fox, HarperCollins, and The Wall Street Journal. Murdoch formed the British broadcaster BSkyB in 1990, and during the 1990s expanded into Asian networks and South American television. By 2000, Murdoch's News Corporation owned over 800 companies in more than 50 countries, with a net worth of over $5 billion. In July 2011, Murdoch faced allegations that his companies, including the News of the World, owned by News Corporation, had been regularly hacking the phones of celebrities, royalty, and public citizens. Murdoch faced police and government investigations into bribery and corruption by the British government and FBI investigations in the US. On 21 July 2012, Murdoch resigned as a director of News International. On 1 July 2015, Murdoch left his post as CEO of 21st Century Fox. Murdoch and his family own both 21st Century Fox and News Corp through the Murdoch Family Trust. In July 2016, after the resignation of Roger Ailes due to accusations of sexual harassment, Murdoch was named the acting CEO of Fox News. Early life. Keith Rupert Murdoch was born on the 11th of March 1931 in Melbourne to Sir Keith Murdoch and Dame Elizabeth Murdoch. He is of English, Irish, and Scottish ancestry. Murdoch's parents were also born in Melbourne. Keith Murdoch was a war correspondent, and later a regional newspaper magnate owning 2 newspapers in Adelaide, South Australia, and a radio station in a faraway mining town. Later in life, Keith Rupert chose to use Rupert, the first name of his maternal grandfather. Keith Murdoch the elder asked to meet with his future wife after seeing her debutante photograph in one of his own newspapers, and they married in 1928. When she was aged 19, and he was 23 years older. In addition to Rupert, the couple had 3 daughters, Janet Calvert-Jones, Anne Cantor, and Helen Hanbury. Murdoch attended Geelong Grammar School, where he was co-editor of the school's official journal The Courier, and editor of the student journal If Revived. He took his school's cricket team to the national junior finals. He worked part-time at the Melbourne Herald and was groomed by his father to take over the family business. Murdoch studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Worcester College, Oxford in England, where he supported the Labour Party, stood for Secretary of the Labour Club, and managed Oxford Student Publications Limited, the publishing house of Cherwell. After her husband's death from cancer in 1952, Elizabeth Murdoch did charity work as Life Governor of the Royal Women's Hospital in Melbourne, and established the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. At the age of 102, she had 74 descendants. Murdoch completed an MA before working as a sub-editor with the Daily Express for 2 years. Activities in Australia and New Zealand. Following his father's death, when he was 21, Murdoch returned from Oxford to take charge of the family business News Limited, which had been established in 1923. Rupert Murdoch turned its Adelaide newspaper, The News, its main asset, into a major success. He began to direct his attention to acquisition and expansion, buying the troubled Sunday Times in Perth, Western Australia and, over the next few years, acquiring suburban and provincial newspapers in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and the Northern Territory, including the Sydney afternoon tabloid, The Daily Mirror. The Economist describes Murdoch as inventing the modern tabloid, as he developed a pattern for his newspapers, increasing sports and scandal coverage and adopting eye-catching headlines. Murdoch's first foray outside Australia involved the purchase of a controlling interest in the New Zealand daily The Dominion. In January 1964, while touring New Zealand with friends in a rented Morris Minor after sailing across the Tasman, Murdoch read of a takeover bid for the Wellington paper by the British-based Canadian newspaper magnate, Lord Thomson of Fleet. On the spur of the moment, he launched a counter-bid. A four-way battle for control ensued in which the 32-year-old Murdoch was ultimately successful. Later in 1964, Murdoch launched The Australian, Australia's first national daily newspaper, which was based first in Canberra and later in Sydney. In 1972, Murdoch acquired the Sydney morning tabloid The Daily Telegraph from Australian media mogul Sir Frank Packer, who later regretted selling it to him. In 1984, Murdoch was appointed Companion of the Order of Australia for services to publishing. In 1999, Murdoch significantly expanded his music holdings in Australia by acquiring the controlling share in a leading Australian independent label, Michael Gudinski's Mushroom Records. He merged that with Festival Records, and the result was Festival Mushroom Records. Both Festival and FMR were managed by Murdoch's son James Murdoch for several years. Political activities in Australia. Murdoch found a political ally in Sir John McEwen, leader of the Australian Country Party, who was governing in coalition with the larger Menzies Holt-Gorton Liberal Party. From the very first issue of The Australian, Murdoch began taking McEwen's side in every issue that divided the long-serving coalition partners. It was an issue that threatened to split the coalition government and open the way for the stronger Australian Labor Party to dominate Australian politics. It was the beginning of a long campaign that served McEwen well. After McEwen and Menzies retired, Murdoch threw his growing power behind the Australian Labor Party under the leadership of Gough Whitlam, and duly saw it elected on a social platform that included universal free health care, free education for all Australians to tertiary level, recognition of the People's Republic of China, and public ownership of Australia's oil, gas and mineral resources. Rupert Murdoch's backing of Whitlam turned out to be brief. Murdoch had already started his short-lived National Star newspaper in America, and was seeking to strengthen his political contacts there. Asked about the Australian federal election, 2007, at News Corporation's annual general meeting in New York on the 19th of October 2007, its chairman Rupert Murdoch said, "I am not commenting on anything to do with Australian politics. I'm sorry. I always get into trouble when I do that." Pressed as to whether he believed Prime Minister John Howard should continue as Prime Minister, he said, "I have nothing further to say. I'm sorry. Read our editorials in the papers. It'll be the journalists who decide that the editors." In 2009, in response to accusations by Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd that News Limited was running vendettas against him and his government, Murdoch opined that Rudd was oversensitive. Murdoch described Howard's successor, Labour Party Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, as more ambitious to lead the world in tackling climate change than to lead Australia, and criticised Rudd's expansionary fiscal policies in the wake of the financial crisis of 2008 as unnecessary. Although News Limited's interests are extensive, also including the Daily Telegraph, the Courier Mail and the Adelaide Advertiser, it was suggested by the commentator Mungo McCallum in the Monthly that the anti-Rudd push, if coordinated at all, was almost certainly locally driven, as opposed to being directed by Murdoch, who also took a different position from local editors on such matters as climate change and stimulus packages to combat the financial crisis. Murdoch is a supporter of an Australian republic, having campaigned for one during the 1999 referendum. Business activities in the United Kingdom. In 1968, Murdoch entered the British newspaper market with his acquisition of the populist News of the World, followed in 1969 with the purchase of the struggling daily The Sun from IPC. Murdoch turned The Sun into a tabloid format and reduced costs by using the same printing press for both newspapers. On acquiring it, he appointed Albert Larry Lamb as editor, and Lamb recalled later told him, "I want a tear-away paper with lots of tits in it." In 1997 The Sun attracted 10 million daily readers. In 1981, Murdoch acquired the struggling Times and Sunday Times from Canadian newspaper publisher Lord Thomson of Fleet. Ownership of the Times came to him through his relationship with Lord Thomson, who had grown tired of losing money on it as a result of an extended period of industrial action that stopped publication. In the light of success and expansion at The Sun, the owners believed that Murdoch could turn the papers around. Harold Evans, editor of the Sunday Times from 1967, was switched to the Daily Times, though he stayed only a year amid editorial conflict with Murdoch. During the 1980s and early 1990s, Murdoch's publications were generally supportive of Britain's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. At the end of the Thatcher/Major era, Murdoch switched his support to the Labour Party and its leader, Tony Blair. The closeness of his relationship with Blair and their secret meetings to discuss national policies was to become a political issue in Britain. This later changed, with The Sun, in its English editions, publicly renouncing the ruling Labour government and lending its support to David Cameron's Conservative Party, which soon afterwards formed a coalition government. In Scotland, where the Tories had suffered a complete annihilation in 1997, the paper began to endorse the Scottish National Party, which soon after came to form the first ever outright majority in the proportionally elected Scottish Parliament. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's official spokesman said in November 2009 that Brown and Murdoch were in regular communication, and that there is nothing unusual in the Prime Minister talking to Rupert Murdoch. In 1986, Murdoch introduced electronic production processes to his newspapers in Australia, Britain and the United States. The greater degree of automation led to significant reductions in the number of employees involved in the printing process. In England, the move roused the anger of the print unions, resulting in a long and often violent dispute that played out in Wapping, one of London's Docklands areas, where Murdoch had installed the very latest electronic newspaper purpose-built publishing facility in an old warehouse. The bitter Wapping dispute started with the dismissal of 6,000 employees who had gone on strike and resulted in street battles and demonstrations. Many on the political left in Britain alleged the collusion of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government with Murdoch in the Wapping affair as a way of damaging the British trade union movement. In 1987, the dismissed workers accepted a settlement of £60 million. Murdoch's British-based satellite network, Sky Television, incurred massive losses in its early years of operation. As with many of his other business interests, Sky was heavily subsidized by the profits generated by his other holdings, but convinced rival satellite operator British Satellite Broadcasting to accept a merger on his terms in 1990. The merged company, BSkyB, has dominated the British pay-TV market ever since, pursuing direct-to-home satellite broadcasting. By 1996, BSkyB had more than 3.6 million subscribers, triple the number of cable customers in the UK. Murdoch has a seat on the Strategic Advisory Board of Genie Oil and Gas, having jointly investing with Lord Rothschild in a 5.5% stake in the company which conducted shale gas and oil exploration in Colorado, Mongolia, Israel and, controversially, the occupied Golan Heights. In response to print media's decline and the increasing influence of online journalism during the 2000s, Murdoch proclaimed his support of the micropayments model for obtaining revenue from online news, although this has been criticized by some. News Corporation has subsidiaries in the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, the Channel Islands and the Virgin Islands. From 1986, News Corporation's annual tax bill averaged around 7% of its profits. Political activities in United Kingdom. In Britain, in the 1980s, Murdoch formed a close alliance with Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and The Sun credited itself with helping her successor John Major to win an unexpected election victory in the 1992 general election, which had been expected to end in a hung parliament or a narrow win for Neil Kinnock's Labour. In the general elections of 1997, 2001 and 2005, Murdoch's papers were either neutral or supported Labour under Tony Blair. The Labour Party, from when Tony Blair became leader in 1994, had moved from the left to a more centrist position on many economic issues prior to 1997. Murdoch identifies himself as a libertarian, saying, "What does libertarian mean? As much individual responsibility as possible, as little government as possible, as few rules as possible. But I'm not saying it should be taken to the absolute limit." In a 2005 speech delivered in New York, Murdoch said that Blair described the BBC coverage of the Hurricane Katrina disaster as being full of hatred of America. In 1998, Murdoch made an attempt to buy the football club Manchester United FC with an offer of £625 million, but this failed. It was the largest amount ever offered for a sports club. It was blocked by the United Kingdom's Competition Commission, which stated that the acquisition would have hurt competition in the broadcast industry and the quality of British football. On the 28th of June 2006, the BBC reported that Murdoch and News Corporation were considering backing new Conservative leader David Cameron at the next general election, still up to 4 years away. In a later interview in July 2006, when he was asked what he thought of the Conservative leader, Murdoch replied, "Not much." In a 2009 blog, it was suggested that in the aftermath of the news of the world phone hacking scandal, which might yet have transatlantic implications, Murdoch and News Corporation might have decided to back Cameron. Despite this, there had already been a convergence of interests between the two men over the muting of Britain's communications regulator Ofcom. In August 2008, British Conservative leader and future Prime Minister David Cameron accepted free flights to hold private talks and attend private parties with Murdoch on his yacht, the Rose Hearty. Cameron has declared in the Commons Register of Interests he accepted a private plane provided by Murdoch's son-in-law, public relations guru Matthew Freud. Cameron has not revealed his talks with Murdoch. The gift of travel in Freud's Gulfstream 4 private jet was valued at around £30,000. Other guests attending the social events included the then EU Trade Commissioner Lord Mandelson, the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska and co-chairman of NBC Universal Ben Silverman. The Conservatives have not disclosed what was discussed. In July 2011, it emerged that Cameron met key executives of Murdoch's News Corporation 26 times during the 14 months that Cameron had served as Prime Minister. It was also reported that Murdoch had given Cameron a personal guarantee that there would be no risk attached to hiring Andy Coulson, the former editor of News of the World, as the Conservative Party's communication director in 2007. This was in spite of Coulson having resigned as editor over phone hacking by a reporter. Cameron chose to take Murdoch's advice, despite warnings from Nick Clegg, Lord Ashdown, and The Guardian. Coulson resigned his post in 2011 and was later arrested and questioned on allegations of further criminal activity at the News of the World, specifically the News International phone hacking scandal. As a result of the subsequent trial, Coulson was sentenced to 18 months in jail. In June 2016, the Sun supported vote leave in the United Kingdom European Union membership referendum. Murdoch called the Brexit result wonderful, comparing the decision to withdraw from the EU as like a prison break. We're out. Attempted takeover of BSkyB. In January 2018, the CMA blocked Murdoch from taking over the remaining 61% of BSkyB it does not already own, over fear of market dominance that could potentialize censorship of the media. News International phone hacking scandal. In July 2011, Murdoch, along with his son James, provided testimony before a British parliamentary committee regarding phone hacking. In the UK, his media empire remains under fire as investigators continue to probe reports of other phone hacking. On the 14th of July, the Culture, Media and Sport Committee of the House of Commons served a summons on Murdoch, his son James, and his former CEO Rebecca Brooks to testify before a committee on the 19th of July. After an initial refusal, The Murdochs confirmed they would attend after the committee issued them a summons to Parliament. The day before the committee, the website of the News Corporation publication The Sun was hacked, and a false story was posted on the front page claiming that Murdoch had died. Murdoch described the day of the committee, "the most humble day of my life." He argued that since he ran a global business of 53,000 employees, and that the news of the world was just 1% of this, he was not ultimately responsible for what went on at the tabloid. He added that he had not considered resigning, and that he and the other top executives had been completely unaware of the hacking. On the 15th of July, Murdoch attended a private meeting in London with the family of Millie Dowler, where he personally apologized for their hacking of their murdered daughter's voicemail by a company he owns. On 16 and the 17th of July, News International published 2 full-page apologies in many of Britain's national newspapers. The first apology took the form of a letter, signed by Murdoch, in which he said sorry for the serious wrongdoing that occurred. The second was titled, "Putting Right What's Gone Wrong," and gave more detail about the steps News International was taking to address the public's concerns. In the wake of the allegations, Murdoch accepted the resignations of Rebecca Brooks, head of Murdoch's British operations, and Leigh Hinton, head of Dow Jones, who was chairman of Murdoch's British newspaper division when some of the abuses happened. They both deny any knowledge of any wrongdoing under their command. On the 27th of February 2012, the day after the first issue of The Sun on Sunday was published, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Sue Akers informed the Leveson inquiry that police are investigating a network of corrupt officials as part of their inquiries into phone hacking and police corruption. She said that evidence suggested a culture of illegal payments at the Sun newspaper and that these payments allegedly made by the Sun were authorized at a senior level. In testimony on the 25th of April 2012, Murdoch did not deny the quote attributed to him by his former editor of the Sunday Times, Harold Evans, "I give instructions to my editors all round the world, why shouldn't I in London?" On the 1st of May 2012, the Culture, Media, and Sport Committee issued a report stating that Murdoch was not a fit person to exercise the stewardship of a major international company. On the 3rd of July 2013, the Exaro website and Channel 4 News broke the story of a secretly recorded tape. The tape was recorded by Sun journalists, and in it Murdoch can be heard telling them that the whole investigation was one big fuss over nothing, and that he, or his successors, would take care of any journalists who went to prison. He said, "Why are the police behaving in this way? It's the biggest inquiry ever, over next to nothing." Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?